All right, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Living the Dream podcast. Today on the show, we have Kate Wallinga, who is a podcaster, forensic psychologist, mother, and storyteller. Kate, how you doing?
I'm doing all right, thank you.
Of course, yeah, and we like to jump right in. So if you could start with just telling us a little bit more about yourself and what you like to do for fun, that'd be great.
Oh, that's a stretch. I've had intense medical issues this year, so the concept of fun has sort of shifted for me over what it used to be, maybe. But I'm I've been on permanent disability since 2014, and so my podcast started as a hobby. It started as for fun. I can now call it it's sort of a profession. I earn part-time pay for full-time work,
Yep,
as podcasting does.
gotcha.
But I'm also a knitter and I have 4 kids, and so there's a fair amount of chaos in my life.
I gotcha. 4 kids. And so is there a spouse in the home as well?
Mhm. Yeah,
Okay.
I've been married 23 years. And so it's all, well, the three oldest are biologically ours. And then the only surprise child that was the last one, we didn't expect to adopt. And surprise, it's a girl.
Surprise, yeah. There we go. So knitting, 4 kids, married 23 years. The podcast started as a hobby. It also says forensic psychologist. And so was that pre 2014 or?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's one of those that just because I don't get paid for it anymore, you kind of can't take the training out of it. It changes how you view the world and how you view other people.
Talk to us a bit about that.
I think a lot of people assume that forensic psychology, first of all, they assume it's like profiling. So, like the show Mindhunter.
Hmm.
It's not. I initially was going to go down that road. I was I was actually studying for my engineering degree and realized I didn't want to do that. And someone, when I was sick in college, someone happened to bring me the book Mindhunter. And I was like, oh, I could do this. This guy sounds like he likes his job. That sounds fun. I'll do that. And then I realized I don't want to be a cop.
Yeah.
And so what can I do that humanizes inmates or accused people and just generally brings some form of empathy into the criminal justice world? And the answer is forensic psychology. So it's basically doing assessment. You don't do much in the way of therapy, and there's reasons for that. um, it boils down to have a good therapy session, you have to get very vulnerable and
Yeah.
really get sort of broken down, and then you work on putting yourself back together, and you can't do that to somebody in prison. You might as well just tape a sign to their back that says kick me, because they need the front, they need to stay looking strong and looking together, and they can't look vulnerable or emotional. It's not safe. So instead, it was a lot more of doing assessments for competency to stand trial, figuring out diagnoses, best placement if they're adjudicated guilty, things like that. And it was a privilege for me because everybody else in the criminal justice system is either on your side, which is not very many people, or they're against you, which is everybody. And I got to walk in saying, I'm not taking sides.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. And so forensic psychology, mother, storyteller. Tell us about the storytelling part.
I started my podcast in 2018. My father had moved in with us. I have 4 kids, and my oldest is now. So at the time, I have to do the math. At the time, my oldest would have been almost 18. Next one would have been 14, then 8 and 5, approximately, because my
Big
kids are
spread.
it's a big spread. It takes me 5 years to forget how much work kids are and think that that's a good idea. Let's do that again. So, you know, and my father had moved in with us after a messy divorce, and I had been on disability for about 4 years by that point, and needed some way of feeling functional in the world again. I needed to feel competent and smart,
Yeah.
because you reach a point where when you're on disability, a lot of people say, and I think they mean it, which is terrible. They'll say, "Oh, I wish I could do nothing but sit on the couch all day." And I'm like, "Yeah, try it for a week."
Yeah.
Like, it stops being fun really quick. I broke my back, and so it was not fun. It was not at all.
Yeah.
0 stars. Do not recommend. And so I felt like I wasn't playing the lead role in my own life anymore. I
Hmm.
felt like I was just the supporting actor to my kids' lives and my husband's life and my father's life. And so on New Year's Day of 2018, I kind of hit a wall a little bit. And so, depending on who's telling the story, I either gently and calmly walked up to my husband and tapped him on the shoulder, or I grabbed him by the shirt collar and pulled him in real close. And I said, "I'm starting a podcast." And being a smart man, he said, "Okay."
Yep.
Do you need anything from me? And I'm like, I need you to leave me alone. I needed a hobby where nobody could talk to me and
Yeah.
where I could have silence and I could have my own space. And I thought, I don't know, it'll be 10 or 20 episodes. I'll effectively describe the difference between forensic psychology and regular psychology and profiling and that kind of thing. And then I'll be done. And 5.5 years and almost 500 episodes later, I'm not done.
There we go. There we go. There we go. So, what is the podcast about? Is it still keeping with that original topic? Have you branched
N-
off?
Not at all. So it was originally what I would call true crime adjacent.
Hmm.
Some of the earliest stories were very true crime, very narrative, pre-scripted, that kind of thing. And then I realized that felt like work without getting paid at all, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted it to be more fun than stress. And maybe my fifth episode, give or take, I happened to be talking to somebody on Twitter, and she's an emergency room nurse. And I was like, "Oh, I used to do work in the emergency room. I used to do crisis evaluations as well. And so let's hop on right now and record a collaboration. And you can explain the medical stuff that happens to people, and then I can explain the the psychiatric stuff that happens, the behavioral health side of things."
Yeah.
And when I got done with that episode, I was so much more energetic and so much more revved up, and I was like, "That's it. That's my space in the podcasting world, is talking to other people." and and I'm good at pulling stories out of people. That's part of my what my job was before, and I just kind of stayed with that to a degree. I stayed in the true crime realm for about a year, and then I was at a convention for true crime podcasters, and I had another podcaster, stop me, like literally in the middle of this hotel room, ballroom convention floor, and explain to me that my show wasn't really true crime. Now, she didn't know. I asked her, "Okay, where is the nearest prison to where you live? What, name 4 people that you know personally that you've spoken to that have broken laws, and how you've helped in some way." She couldn't answer those questions, but she was ready to gatekeep me on what true crime meant. And so I could have thrown a tantrum, and I certainly did in my head, but I decided instead, you know what? I'm gonna take this as permission to pull the lens back, and I'm just gonna talk to whoever I want to, because I want to talk to people who are not just true crime podcasters or professionals. And so that's what my show is now. It's a complete grab bag. Every episode is intended to stand alone, and I let my guests set the course, and sort of I follow them along. It's my job to pull their story out of them, whatever story it is that they want to tell. And so sometimes it's true crime, sometimes it's acting, sometimes it's authors, sometimes it's all of the above. I kind of never know. I start every episode with a blank piece of paper in front of me, so that I don't have a preconceived idea of where things are going to go.
Solid. And do you like it more like this? Do you
Yeah.
prefer parts of the true crime
I
niche?
mean, I like, true crime is where my heart lies professionally,
Hmm.
but it can get pretty dark and voyeuristic and sensationalistic, especially in the, entertainment podcasting world. And so I like having sort of the permission to go lighter, to
Yeah.
go any topic. And there's still, I mean, my most recent, either my most recent or next to last, I don't remember, but a very recent episode was with a guy who committed crimes
Mm.
and wrote a book about it. So it still goes back into the true crime area if that's where my guest wants to go. It's just, I get to talk about whatever is important to my guest.
Yeah, I gotcha. And so what's your motivation? What really gets you up and keeps you going every day? Not just behind the show, but in life.
And well, that's a hard question to ask somebody who's on disability because it becomes a very different, it's a different creature altogether.
Hmm.
I used to feel like I had a place on the world and that I was making a difference in people's lives. And then I spent several years not feeling like that at all.
Yeah.
Like really just feeling like I was disappearing. And the podcast doesn't, it wasn't created for that. Like I had been told that it makes a difference for people and that's great. But I feel like I feel like it would be presumptuous of me to say my podcast exists solely to make a difference in other people's lives because sometimes we're just screwing around or sometimes it's just sort of promotional in nature. And it's not up to me
Yeah.
what makes a difference in other people's lives. My podcast is meant to give me a voice in a very literal sense. And every time, and still now, 500 episodes almost, every time I go down to record, I have a moment, which could be a couple of seconds or could be an hour, of very intense social anxiety. This is the one I'm going to screw up. This is the one that it's going to go poorly. This is the one that I'm not up for. I don't feel well. I'm tired. I've been very, very sick this year. Specifically, I'm on an IV right now. And, so like it's been a rough go. And then I record. And afterward, I always feel better
Yeah.
every time. And it's this is my window, my connection to the outside world. And so if it benefits other people, that's great. But more like I don't have any control over that. What I have control over is that it helps me feel like I still have a relevant place in the world.
I gotcha. And so is your condition such that you'll be on disability for the rest of your life
Yeah,
or
it's permanent. Hmm.
I got
Yes, it started with only visual quotes with the only I broke my back, but then since then I've developed epilepsy, and I also have my newest adventure is called gastroparesis, which is a stomach condition. Effectively, my stomach has stopped stomaching, and so I can't eat. Like it doesn't. Yeah, that do that for several months. That was kind of my response. Um, but so it just sort of went, it was like a switch was thrown around February 1st of this year where I was basically eating like a normal human being and then suddenly very sick a lot, and I kept going to the ER and they would tell me, well, you've got a stomach bug, and they'd run a bag of IV fluids and maybe give me some anti-nausea meds and send me home. And at the 10th time of that, I threw a tantrum and I was like, you can't keep doing this. It's not a stomach bug. Clearly it's not a stomach bug. And it turns out no, it's not.
yeah. Well, dang. And so were those things destined to happen to you or was the breaking your back kind of a domino? Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, I don't believe that everything happens for a reason. I think so. As a for instance, in 2010, I effectively died in childbirth with my third kid. Um, Somebody in the delivery room had strep throat, and it caused my uterus to rupture about 12 hours after the baby was born. And if I felt like everything happened for a reason, I would feel like I must be a really terrible human being because here I am doing, arguably a good thing, bringing life into the world. I followed all my doctor's instructions and, I gave birth in a safe, theoretically healthy environment. And yet I spent 10 days in a coma and, 6 weeks in the hospital and so on. I don't believe I deserved that. I don't believe I did anything bad or that I that there was a reason that happened, like destiny. But what I do believe, and I believe it very strongly, is that we assign meaning to things. And so after some time passed and after I gave some thought to like where does this fit in my life and what's the outcome and was it all terrible or are there some good aspects to this as well? And ultimately you're able to sort of assign meaning to something. So I don't believe that it was all meant to happen, but I believe that if I hadn't gone through that, then as a for instance, I wouldn't have ended up with our fourth kid because I was so sick for so long then that we had to hire a nanny because I couldn't manage. I had a 10-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a newborn at the time. And I just, there's no possible with you don't even want, trust me, that you don't want
Yes.
details. But we had to hire a nanny and she was an excellent nanny. Then she decided she wanted to be a single mom. Not a great decision on her part. She was not a good mother. And she called me 2.5 years later to say, I need help. I've hit a crisis point. I need help. Can you take care of the baby while I check myself into the hospital? Of course, but it turns out that people had told her no already. So there is that. But ultimately, after about 6 months, we had to firmly invite her not to live here anymore because some of her behaviors that were going on inside the house. But we gave her the choice of you can leave the baby here and we'll take care of her while you get yourself settled, or you can take the baby with you, but you gotta go. And she's like, well, I think I'll leave the baby here. I think it'll be easier to get set up, in an apartment or whatever on my own. And then 2 weeks later, she called and said, I'm never going to get better. You keep her. So, okay, like here we go, and my husband and I had talked over the possibility or even likelihood by then that this was going to happen. And so if I hadn't almost died in childbirth in 2010, then we wouldn't have hired the nanny. Then she wouldn't have called me in late 2012 2014 to ask for help. Then in 2015 we wouldn't have completed the adoption. Right. So I'm very much into the butterfly effect, or the idea of dominoes makes
Yep.
sense to me, but I don't believe that it had to, like, I think everything had to happen in the way that it did in order for me to end up right here. But it, if things had worked out differently and I had ended up somewhere else, that would have been okay too.
I gotcha. Well, tell us a little bit about your dreams and goals. What's your vision for life in the podcast?
Honestly, if I can just sort of maintain,
Hmm.
that would be a big deal for me. That I seem to be wired wrong. One of the fears that I've started to develop lately is that people are going to start hitting me up with, are you sure you're really sick? You don't look sick. Are you sure you got all these things wrong with me? Because it's not just that I get weird things medically wrong, but that they end up being catastrophic.
Yeah.
And I don't expect them. Earlier this year I was fine. I had rolled over 1 million downloads. I was planning on, a sort of a live event to celebrate that. I was making plans to travel. I had a lot going on. And then suddenly, like I said, it was like a switch was thrown. And suddenly I'm barely functioning.
Yeah.
And so if I can just maintain, and that's very much a day by day thing. I've cut my recording schedule way back down. I used to record 4 or 5 nights a week, which means you have to put out 3 or 4 or 5 episodes a week to keep up with yourself. I've cut it down to 2 days a week that I'm recording. And if I can just sort of maintain,
Yeah.
that would be a success for me. Right now, it amuses me because my kids are online
Mhm.
now. None of them listens to my show, jerks. But honestly, it's okay. I deliberately bring a lot of myself into the show. I didn't want the show to feel like me conducting therapy sessions or assessment process. And so I'm leaving behind who and what I am in spoken form, because I no longer feel like I'm going to live forever. I feel like I'm past middle age by this point. And so my kids and my husband will have this piece of me after I die.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a big deal.
You look
And
like you still got 50 to 60 years left.
oh, dear God, no, no, no. I really hope not. I mean, I'm 46 as it is, so let's. I don't have that, but it's okay. Like I'm okay with the idea of mortality.
Yeah.
I've survived a lot of stuff, and so one of these days I'm gonna hit something that I can't survive, and I have to kind of come to terms with that, and that's okay. That's okay. um Another piece, one way that I do know that my podcast has made a difference with other people is I have a disclaimer at the beginning of each one, and it's effectively saying this podcast is not safe for work, small children, or houseplants. I maintain privacy and confidentiality. And then I include the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number. And it's not me reading it. I have other podcasters and friends and even my kids who have read it. And the disclaimer ends with the words, "You matter." And I've had people tell me that there are days where they're having a hard enough time in life that they'll listen to my show just to hear someone tell them they matter,
Mm.
just to get through the end of the disclaimer. And that's a that's a profound thing. I think that is wrong with our society in a lot of ways, that we can't just tell each other that and then we don't believe that about ourselves. So that's something that I try to bake in. It's part of the disclaimer and it's part of my outro now for every episode. And so if I can make people understand that they do matter, that's a huge accomplishment.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. I think it's just about the only thing wrong. Like if we all believed that we mattered as much as we actually do, and we believed that everybody around us mattered as much as they actually do, we would go to the ends of the earth in love
Right?
for each other, because humans and the human soul and the human heart and just the most precious thing on the planet. And I think we lose sight of that all too
Yeah,
often. So
absolutely.
I love it. So dreams and goals maintain
Yeah.
podcast, maintain life, maintain relationships, all the above.
Yeah, that's is like I feel like I peaked early, maybe. I was working my dream job before I was 30, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I have to be grateful for that and appreciative of the things that I did get to do. I people talk about serial killers. People talk about what it is like to be in the room with someone who has attempted or threatened suicide, but they haven't necessarily done it. Those were things that I got to do all of the time. And the way that I sort of maintained my own sanity working under those conditions was to remind myself every day and often out loud, this is a privilege,
Yeah.
getting to see people like this. And and so now it's less so because the podcast is more, it's not private,
Yeah.
and it's more promotional entertainment in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
But still, it's a privilege that people tell me their stories and that people talk to me and let me into their lives.
Yeah. No, for sure. And so maintaining, what are the top, this might be a counterintuitive question, but I'm curious if you have an answer. What are the skills that you need to develop in order to maintain?
It takes courage.
Yeah.
It and it takes persistent and stubbornness, and I am definitely persistent and I am definitely stubborn, and I have learned courage over time. There's You want to give up a lot of times when the chronically ill in our society, we're kind of invisible.
Yeah.
And I have a handicap parking tag on my car, and I can't attend a lot of events that I want to, especially now because so many events circle around food.
Mhm.
And it's like, yeah, I'm not gonna I'm not gonna go and sit and watch you eat, thanks. Like it's just not my idea of a good time. And so it started off with being just too stubborn to give up, but it has turned into having the bravery to get up and get out of bed every day and to contribute in whatever ways that I'm able. And so there are some days where the sum total of my contribution to the world is that I knit a couple of stitches or that I exchanged a couple of texts with somebody. And that has to be okay.
Yeah.
So that's another one is I guess equanimity, maybe, acceptance of my limits and acceptance, acknowledging of my own, not importance, that feels snotty. It's not that, but the fact that if I'm telling other people they matter, I have to accept that I do too.
Yeah.
And that I'm allowed to have limits and I'm allowed to have a breaking point.
Yeah. I like it. Well, I feel like the rest of the questions, honestly, don't really apply here. So we're going to jump on through to our thriving three. And so, what's your favorite book, movie, or podcast? Pick one of the three.
I gotta go with, it's both book and movie, is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen.
Okay.
And very specifically the 1995 BBC A&E version. Those who know, they know.
And that is not me. I do not know what you're talking about, but I'll take your word at it for sure. Have there been more modern productions?
I'm deaf, so
Yeah.
which is another thing that people don't, you wouldn't know about me offhand. But so my hearing has been bad since my early teens, which is why I don't sound deaf, is because I learned how to speak before I lost my hearing. But it's bad enough now. I hear about 25% of what normal people do.
Yeah.
So I don't watch movies anymore. I don't watch TV because captioning is not reliable
Hmm.
and I don't miss it. So I do a fair amount of reading, and that all depends on mood. I'll read
I
kind of
got
whatever people will allow, bring to me or whatever. Like very recently, I read a book called The Five by Hallie Rubenhold, which is about the supposed victims of Jack the Ripper, although she totally dismantles it and takes it from a very feminist point of view and points out that I don't think Jack the Ripper is actually a person.
you. Mm,
Pop culture kinds of stuff.
yeah, I gotcha. And so, what's one way you like to take care of yourself?
I'm sorry, second.
One way you like to take care of yourself?
When I'm struggling, when I developed epilepsy, I brought with it ADHD, and so I used to be a list maker, and I used to write lists of like, here's my to-do list for the day, and I can't do that I don't know how to, like, literally line one is write a to-do list, and I end up including like huge sweeping ideas that I'm never going to accomplish, peace in the Middle East kind of stuff. And also like incredibly minute things like remember to use the bathroom or whatever. It's like, I don't know how to write a to-do list anymore. There's a skill to that. And, but when I'm really struggling emotionally, what I've learned to do instead of writing a to-do list at the beginning of the day, I'll sit at the end of the day and write a list of the things that I did accomplish.
Mm,
And they can be small. They can be, I remember to tear the page off my page a day calendar, whatever, or I knit one row on a project that I'm working on, or, I sent an email, whatever. It doesn't have to be big, but the point is to remind myself that I did function a little bit today. I did do some of the things that I had to do today. And that helps a lot because you start feeling useless and kind of pathetic
yeah.
when you're home all the time. And so when I'm really in a rough place, that helps me readjust and realign.
Hmm. Okay. Well, now we got our final series of questions. This is all about beliefs. So, what is one limiting belief that continues to pop up in your life, if any?
It used to be that people didn't believe that there was such a thing as deaf podcasters, and that things like transcripts, things like accessibility didn't matter.
Hmm.
That has, there's still a lot of people who believe that deafness and podcasting don't go together. I've had people tell me I don't look deaf, which is a thing. Okay. But, you know, it kind of goes with that being stubborn of I refuse to automatically believe in limitations. Like, of course, I have them. Everybody has them. But test it,
Yep.
try it out, see if there's maybe a way around it or maybe a substitution for whatever it is I want to do instead of just assigning myself a list of can'ts.
Hey, I'm right there with you. I love it. I asked this question, and a lot of people be like, "I don't have limiting beliefs," and it's because of that underlying reason you just said. It's like they don't identify them as beliefs. They may be limiting thoughts that come to mind, but they don't empower those thoughts and let them kind of hold them back. They go test it, and then when they test it, they typically figure out that, oh, there's something to this. It's not all as bad as I may have thought initially. So
Mm.
I'm right there with you. Last question for you then. What is your favorite belief about yourself?
That I'm kind of a pain in the ass.
Mm,
Like, I'm kind of stubborn, and I like that because being a woman working in a male dominated field, forensics and criminal justice, and in podcasting, it's still sort of it's more male dominated.
yeah,
There's the listening audience for true crime, for instance, is it skews more female, but there are more male hosts, and insisting that, look, my gender really doesn't have anything to do with my abilities to do this stuff.
yeah,
And so, that's something that, I started young with that. I started college at 17 studying engineering. That's not a gender traditional sort of role to do. And I was just like, yeah, okay, but I'm gonna.
yeah,
And that's something that I like, is that I don't automatically absorb limitations based on arbitrary things like gender or you know where I live in the world or what my beliefs may be. I don't have to share your beliefs in order to get along with you, things like that.
yeah. Well, there we go. Kate, that's all we got for you. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. And is there anything else that you want to chat about before we sign off?
No, I think we're good.
Alrighty. And where can people find you if they want to know more?
My website is iwbpodcast.com. So like ignorance was bliss.
Mm,
And given the state of the world right now is like I just kind of I've taken the username IWB podcast on all of the social media platforms I can find. So it used to be just Facebook and Twitter and done, and now it's Facebook and Twitter and Blue Sky and Post and Mastodon and
yeah.
and like I'm pretty much everywhere. IWB podcast on all of the social medias that I can figure out.
Sounds good. Well, if you guys are listening to this and you loved what Kate had to say, make sure to check her out. All the links to do so will be down in the show notes. Kate, thanks for coming on the show again.
Thank you.
Guys, thank you for watching. We will see you on the next one. And on that note, we're out.